Hello everyone. As we previously discussed in the chapter life processes about nutrition, modes of nutrition, in the heterotrophic mode of nutrition and autotrophic modes of nutrition. So, we have discussed a lot about how do we intake food, how is the food digested, then the food is the source of energy, and uh, all these things. So, how is the food getting converted into energy? We'll discuss that later on. Okay. So, we'll start today by respiration, which is another major process in the formation of energy that we use for different metabolic processes or activities that we daily pursue. So, starting on with respiration. Okay. So we all know that we haven't taken the food, and that food is going to convert it into energy that would provide our cells to maintain and regulate different purposes. Okay, so the food is getting converted into energy. The food is getting converted into energy, and this process is taking place in the cytoplasm. Okay, cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is present in the cell. Okay, so this particular process of conversion of food into energy is taking place at cellular level, right? Okay, so in the cytoplasm it is taking place, but it has different pathways. Okay, it can take place in many ways. For example, it can take place in the presence of energy, oxygen, sorry, and in the absence of oxygen, also in the limited short supply of oxygen. Okay, so there are majorly three pathways in which the food will be converted into energy. Okay, so as the byproduct of the food, we had glucose. Okay, we had glucose, which is a six carbon molecule. Okay, so that glucose would be converted into pyruvate, which is a three carbon molecule. Okay, three carbon molecule. Okay, so the glucose is getting converted into pyruvate, and this is taking place in the cytoplasm. Furthermore, this pyruvate would be converted into energy, and that would follow three major pathways. Firstly, in the absence of oxygen in the organisms like yeast. So, in the absence of oxygen, it would be converted into CO2 plus ethanol plus energy. And this is taking place in the absence of oxygen, right? And another thing, in the presence of oxygen, it would be converted into H2O plus CO2 plus energy, right? Another pathway is limited supply of oxygen, and it would be converted into lactic acid and energy. So, concerning these three pathways, we have two processes, mainly aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay, so in the process in which this conversion of pyruvate into CO2, ethanol, and energy is taking place, sorry, in the absence of oxygen, that would be regarded as anaerobic respiration. Whereas the process in which this conversion of pyruvate into water and carbon dioxide and energy is taking place in presence of oxygen, it would be regarded as aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration would take place in organisms like humans, plants, animals, and anaerobic respiration would be there in various microorganisms like yeast, etc. Okay, but there is another third category, third pathway, that is formation of lactic acid. So it usually takes place in muscle cells. Okay, so when there is limited supply of oxygen in a particular cell or muscle cell, so what happens? That lactic acid is produced, which is further stored in these muscle cells, and that buildup of lactic acid. So when there is a buildup of lactic acid, so what happens is whenever there is a sudden activity, that lactic acid causes uh, cramps-like situations. Okay, so these cramps are usually because of the buildup of lactic acid, right? So now we know that the energy is produced by all these three pathways. We have got energy as a common byproduct. Okay, okay. So this energy is used to synthesize ATP. ATP is what? Adenosine triphosphate. It is a energy currency. Okay, so energy is utilized in the synthesis of ATP, and further all the processes are facilitated by this ATP. So fuels it fuels all the activities of the cell, right? So there is sufficient supply of oxygen to the aerobic organisms because they inhale oxygen or they exhale carbon dioxide, and this takes place through various desired, we can say, organs. Suppose for unicellular organisms, the diffusion or intake of oxygen takes place through skin. In plants, it takes place through the gaseous exchange that takes place in the stomata of the leaves. And in humans, we have nostrils, we have lungs, we have a definite design organ or organ system for this particular process. So, talking specifically about plants, we have in plants, it usually takes place through the process that we call diffusion. Okay, so this diffusion is environmental conditions dependent. So there are a few conditions, environmental conditions, which regulate this process of diffusion. So this diffusion depend upon the environmental conditions as well as the requirement of plants. So there are two conditions. First scenario is night. So when the photosynthesis process is not taking place, right? So when there is no sun, no photosynthesis will take place. So what would happen? We won't need CO2, right? So what would happen to CO2? It will get exchanged to the atmosphere through stomata. So elimination of CO2 will take place. Okay. But in daytime, we would require this CO2 for the process of photosynthesis, right? So photosynthesis is taking place during day. Photosynthesis is taking place, right? The photosynthesis के लिए we would need carbon dioxide. Okay, CO2 plus H2O gives C6H12O6, etc. So the CO2 is getting utilized. but the byproduct, that is oxygen, it would get eliminated through gaseous exchange that takes place in stomata of the cell. Okay, so the CO2 would get used up and O2 is eliminated. So the diffusion or the respiration in plants is conditional and it depends on two conditions: environmental conditions and requirements of plants. Okay, so in night plants do exhale carbon dioxide, whereas in daytime plants do inhale carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is it about plants respiration. When we talk about animals, okay, we are talking about animals specifically aquatic animals. So aquatic animals, how do they get oxygen from? So they do get oxygen from the oxygen that is dissolved in the water. Aquatic animals are not getting the oxygen that is present in the atmosphere. So they are taking up the oxygen that is dissolved in the water body, right? So they breathe in the dissolved oxygen in the water. So what happen with the fishes? For example, fishes are the aquatic animals. So they do take up the water which have dissolved oxygen in it. So they do take up the water. That water goes to the gills, and further the absorption of oxygen present in that water yet take place. Okay. Whereas when we talk about terrestrial animals, so in terrestrial animals, what is happening that we have dedicated organs to perform a particular function, right? So the surface of this particular organ should be thin and delicate so that the diffusion can take place, right? So when we know that this particular surface is thin and delicate, so it is placed inside the body so that it won't get hurt or it won't get damaged. Hence, it is placed inside the human body. So, in humans, what happens is we have nostrils, okay? We have nostrils, then further nostrils may we have tiny hairs. What does these hairs do? These hairs filters the air, right? Further, there is mucus present in this that passage. Okay, that mucus also help in the filtration of the air. Further, there is throat, which is provided with rings of cartilage. Okay, it is provided with rings of cartilage. What is the rings of cartilage? I'll make a diagram of it. So, suppose this is our nose and we are getting the air from it. This is the mouth, and we are taking the air through it as well. This is the throat. So this is the structure which is present, which we call as rings of cartilage. It provides, it do not let the passage get collapsed in the absence of oxygen or air, especially. Okay. So then it goes further to different, so these are lungs. Okay, these are our lungs. Then there is diaphragm over here. Okay, so these are getting divided, right, like this. And further at the end, there is a bag-like structure which we called as alveoli. Okay, singular form is alveolus, or collectively we call them as alveoli. Okay, it is the bag-like structure in which the air is stored, and through this, the blood vessels or blood capillaries are connected to these alveolar sacs, and at their place surface, the exchange of gases takes place. Right? So, as we breathe in the air, our ribs get lifted up, and the diaphragm gets flattened. So, so the ribs get lifted up, diaphragm gets flattened, and the chest cavity becomes larger. And since opposite to this, when we exhale, our lips get down, diaphragm get back to its normal position, and the chest cavity also becomes smaller, or gets back to its normal condition, right? So, so here at the surface of alveoli, suppose this is a alveolar structure and this is a blood capillary. So what is happening at this particular surface? So the blood is bringing the carbon dioxide rich blood to the alveoli and taking back the oxygen rich blood to the other organs. Okay. So what is happening? The exchange of oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood is taking place at this particular junction. Okay. So oxygen in the alveoli is taken up by the blood, and blood brings the CO2 from the rest of the body, which is taken up by the alveoli, and it further goes to the lungs and back to the atmosphere as we exhale. Okay. So there is another thing that we call as respiratory pigment. Okay. So there is a thing that we call as respiratory pigment. Respiratory pigment. So what does this respiratory pigment do? So respiratory pigment is helping in the binding of oxygen. So respiratory pigment is basically present in the blood, which is helping in getting the oxygen binded to the blood so that it can easily be carried along. Okay. So this respiratory pigment in humans is called hemoglobin. Okay. So hemoglobin has high affinity to oxygen, so it gets easily attached and can easily be transported across the body. Okay. So this hemoglobin is present in the red blood cells of the blood and has high affinity to O2. Okay. Okay. So another thing talking specifically about this particular diagram. So these are the rings of cartilage. This is our uh, we can say windpipe. Okay. Then pharynx and larynx. Then these are the bronchioles or bronchi. These are alveolar sacs. Then this is diaphragm, etc. Okay. This is mouth cavity, nasal passage, nostrils, etc. Right? Then now we know from here we know that the I'm sorry. So now we know that the exchange of blood is taking place at this particular space. But to pump this particular blood to various organs, or to bring this particular blood, uh, you can say to bring the oxygenated blood to various organs from the lungs, and to bring deoxygenated blood to the lungs, we need a pumping system. Okay, so that pumping system is present for the transportation of this particular blood. Okay, so now moving on to our next topic, transportation. Right. So next topic is transportation, and transportation is taking place through a pumping organ which we usually call as heart. Okay. So one more thing that I want to clarify is that there are two terms that we are going to discuss or use more further. That is deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. So the oxygenated blood is the oxygen-rich blood or the blood which contains oxygen, which is carrying out, which is carried out by blood vessels from the lungs, whereas deoxygenated blood is the carbon dioxide-rich blood or the oxygen-deficient blood, which is taken up by blood vessels to the lungs for gaseous exchange. Right? So we know that the pumping organ is heart. Heart is of size of fist. Fist. What is fist? So it is of this particular size. Okay. Then heart has different chambers. Suppose this is our heart, so it is divided into four chambers. Upper chambers are called atrium, whereas the lower chambers are called as ventricles. So this is the right atrium, this is right ventricle, this is left atrium, this is left ventricle. Right? Okay. Then these chambers, why is it divided into these chambers? So that the oxygenated blood as well as the deoxygenated blood do not get mixed up. Okay. So to prevent the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, heart is divided into four chambers. There are a few organisms in which these chambers are reduced to three and even two. So, in few vertebrates or reptiles, the heart is divided into three chambers, and in those particular organisms, the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood can be, we can say, can be adjusted or we can bear that particular level of mixing. Okay, whereas in aquatic organisms like fishes, the heart is divided into two chambers only, and in suppose there is a cycle of this is heart. Suppose this is another organ, so this deoxygenated blood from suppose some other tissue is getting uh, coming from coming to the heart and then further this oxygenated blood is going to that particular tissue. So this is a process which is taking place. So this is a complete cycle, right? Okay. So this is taking place two times, right? First cycle is the tissues get transferring the deoxygenated blood to the heart, and then the oxygenated blood is uh, coming to back to the tissue. Okay, so this is a single cycle or one step cycle. Whereas there is another thing in humans that the blood is coming to heart, then carried to lungs, and then further from the lungs carried to heart, and then transferred to tissues. So this is double circulation. We will regard this particular process as double circulation. So in animals like fishes, there is single process which we call as single circulation, or in humans, it is regarded as double circulation, right? So further, so suppose this was our heart, these are the four chambers, right? Lower chambers are known as ventricles, upper chambers are known as atrium, right? Now we know that the heart, these chambers prevent the mixing of blood, and the carbon dioxide rich blood is carried to the lungs, and then the oxygen rich blood is carried back to the heart and then further provided to various organs. Various organs. Okay. So these ventricles, lower ventricles, so what is happening over here is, so suppose this is our heart, okay, this is right atrium, this is right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. Right. So what is happening? The oxygenated blood is coming to left atrium, right? It is coming to left atrium. So when the blood is getting filled in the left atrium, it relaxes. Furthermore, it contracts when the blood is filled in the left ventricle from it. Okay, so it is regulated by a valve to prevent the backflow, right? Further from the left ventricle, it will be uh, taken back to some other tissues or organs, right? Another thing that the right atrium is receiving the deoxygenated blood, okay, and further it relaxes when the blood is getting filled in it, whereas when it contracts through a valve, blood is getting filled in the right ventricle, and then further it is taken up by another, uh, you can say, vein to the lungs. Okay, then further, यहाँ we are getting the blood from the lungs and taking to the tissues से we are taking it to the right atrium. Okay, so this is the process. So there are a few terms which are veins and arteries. So the function of veins do take up the deoxygenated blood from organs to heart. Okay, whereas arteries do take up oxygenated blood to organs from heart, right? So, so this would be regarded as vein, whereas this would be regarded as artery. Okay, right? So the largest vein is vena cava in our body, and the largest artery is aorta. Okay, then another term is pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein. So when the term pulmonary gets attached to it, the roles of veins and arteries get reversed. Okay, so the pulmonary arteries is carrying the deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and again pulmonary vein is taking up the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Coming back to our original left photograph, that is, so this particular vein, or which is taking up the deoxygenated blood from left ventricle to the lungs, would be regarded as pulmonary artery, whereas this particular capillary, which is bringing the oxygen rich blood to the left atrium, would be regarded as pulmonary vein. Okay, right. So there are a few animals uh, which can bear this particular mixing of oxygenated blood or deoxygenated blood, whereas we cannot bear that. So these ventricles, okay, these ventricles are of thick muscles, so that they won't get ruptured easily, okay, or the mixing of blood can take place, okay. So arteries are carrying the oxygen-rich blood away from the heart to the various organs. So they are thick and have elastic walls. Okay. So these arteries have thick and elastic walls because they are taking that blood with very high pressure. So to maintain that particular pressure and to prevent the blockage or the rupture of these arteries, so these have very thick and elastic walls to be a very high pressure. Okay. So as veins are carrying the deoxygenated blood, so they don't need to carry that with very high pressure, so they do not have very thick walls because they are not very prone to bear very high pressure. Okay, so these arteries, suppose this is an artery, when it is taking the blood from heart to a particular organ, it is bringing the oxygen-rich blood from the heart to a particular organ. It would get divided into a few segments which would be regarded as capillaries. Okay, so these are known as capillaries. These are divided into capillaries or the smaller vessels to bring the blood in contact with all the individual cells of that particular organ. Right. Furthermore, when these capillaries goes out from this particular organ and back to the heart, these capillaries get combined to form a single vessel which is regarded as vein. So the arteries get divided into blood vessels or smaller vessels which are regarded as capillaries, and further these capillaries combine to form vein. Okay, these join together to form vein. Another thing that is there in these is platelets. Suppose this capillary starts to get leak, or there is an injury, or there is a cut, which leads to the leakage of this particular vessel. Okay, so what would happen? So the blood contains these platelets, which are there to fix up any leakage as soon as possible. So it helps in the clotting of blood. It is there as an rescue mechanism or protective measure, or therefore the maintenance of these vessels, so that to ensure the regular supply to the organs from the and then further providing the mechanism is okay. To fix any leakage, there are platelets in the blood. There is another thing that is present over there, which we usually regard as lymph. Okay, so lymph is also there. What is lymph? So lymph is another fluid that takes place in the that is involved in the transportation processes. So it carries digested and absorbed fats from the intestine and brings extra food from the extracellular spaces back into the blood. So the question is, how is the lymph formed? Right? So there are some amount of plasma, protein, or blood cells which are released from the pores of these capillaries. These capillaries have a few pores from which a few amount of plasma, protein, or blood cells get escaped into these intercellular spaces of tissue. So this would make up to form lymph. It is generally similar to plasma, but it is colorless and have less amount of protein. Okay, so this is it about transportation in humans. Another thing, another topic is transportation in plants. So for plants do take up their water and minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, etc. They do take all that from soil. So for taking up all that from soil, plants have two pathways, right? Okay. So they have to transport two things. First is the synthesized product from leaves to the various parts. So the photosynthesis is getting take place in the leaf. Okay. So the synthesis of various products, such as energy or other nutrients, is getting take place in the leaves. So they need to be transported to various other organs or other places. So we have to transfer these. Other than that, the raw material from roots needs to be transferred, right? So these two pathways are constructed separately and organized conducting tubes. So we have two conducting tubes, which we usually regard as xylem and phloem, right? So we have these two tubules, xylem and phloem. So what does they do? So xylem helps in the movement of water and minerals obtained from the soil, whereas phloem transports the products of photosynthesis from the leaves to the other parts of the plants. Okay, so starting with xylem. So xylem, the stems and tracheids of roots, stems, and leaves are interconnected. Okay, so these are interconnected from the roots till the stems and leaves for a continuous flow of the nutrients. Okay, so what happens that roots, suppose this is a plant, okay, this is the surface and these are the roots. Okay, so these root cells are in contact with the soil. Okay, so they actively take up ions. They are taking up the ions, whether it is in the form of nitrites, phosphates, okay, or iron, magnesium, or various other ions that are essential for the growth of plants. Okay, so these root cells, which are in contact with the soil, they do take up ions actively, and hence a difference in concentration in the ions in the roots and in the soil takes place. So there is a difference that has developed. We can understand this with the term potential difference that develops due to the different concentrations of a particular ion between two different surfaces. So because of this developed difference, water moves in the roots. Okay. So water moves in the roots very actively, forming a column-like structure and it goes straight to the different parts of the plant. So water moves in roots to reduce this difference. Okay, and it is then pushed upwards. There is another strategy. First strategy is difference, ion difference. Okay, ion difference की वजह से there is transportation of water taking place. Another thing is transpiration. In the previous lecture, we have discussed about the transpiration, that the loss of water through the surface of stomata because of sunlight or because of uh, elevated temperature in the surrounding atmosphere, transpiration take place or the loss of water take place. So that transpiration is also responsible for the transport of water to the plants. So what happens is xylem vessels in the leaf replace the water that is lost by stomata. Okay. So these were the guard cells which used to store the water while the stomata gets open. Okay. So when the stomata gets closed, this water gets transpired. Okay, this water was getting lost, and the water that was stored in the xylem was getting filled in these guard cells to fill up that space again. So, to replace the water lost by stomata, xylem vessels in the leaf would start to collect over there. During the day, when the stomata is open, transpiration full becomes the major driving force in the movement of water in the xylem. Okay? Another term that comes along is translocation. So that was all about xylem, whereas now moving ahead with phloem, right? So phloem requires energy for the transfer of these synthesized molecules or nutrients across the plant. So the transport of soluble products of photosynthesis take place in phloem, and this particular transfer is known as translocation. So the transport of soluble products of photosynthesis is regarded as translocation, and that translocation takes place in the full phloem and energy is utilized by it. Energy is utilized. So the byproducts of photosynthesis as well as amino acids and other substances are transferred through photosynthesis, right? Sorry, phloem, right? Okay. So these are delivered to different storage organs of the roots. Okay. So this is delivering these different products of photosynthesis or amino acids or other compounds to roots where it can be stored. Okay. Energy is in the form of ATP. Energy that is in the form of ATP is utilized. Further, phloem moves material according to the plant need. Right. Then moving ahead to our next topic, that is excretion. So till now we know that we are taking up the nutrition, we are synthesizing food, then digesting the food in humans, synthesizing food in autotrophs, then further we are taking up oxygen and through different mechanisms and then providing that oxygen to different cells or different organs. Then further at that particular cellular level, the oxygen is utilized for the breakup of that food material into the energy. Then further energy is utilized for the repair or maintenance of the cells and different cellular functions. So there are a few waste materials in the process which are generated. So the elimination of those waste or toxic materials takes place, and that particular process is regarded as excretion. So the removal of toxic products is regarded as excretion. So talking about excretion in humans, there is a dedicated organ for that, and these organs are basically a pair of kidney, okay, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. Okay, right. So we have a pair of kidney in our abdomen, okay, below our abdomen in the backside, okay, which is connected to a pair of urethra and a urinary bladder, then pair of ureters, and then connected to a urinary bladder, which used to store urine, and then it is passed through urethra, right? So going further towards its structure, so suppose these are kidneys, bean-shaped structures, okay? So these are connected to a pair of ureter, ureters, which are further connected to. So these are basically renal arteries and renal veins, and these are the two pairs of ureters which are connected to urinary bladder and then urethra. Okay, these are renal arteries and renal veins which are supplying the oxygenated blood to the kidneys and taking up the deoxygenated blood from the kidneys. Right? There is another thing associated with the kidneys. So kidneys are basically regarded as the uh, unit for the purification of the blood. Okay, so but there is so kidneys are basically the filtration units, but there is another thing that is called as nephron. That is the smallest unit present in the kidney, and it is the filtration unit. Okay, so the glucose, amino acids, salts, and major amount of waters are selectively reabsorbed at the in these nephrons, and these depends on how much of the excess water is present in the body. So what happens is, so let us understand this with the help of a diagram of nephron. So this is a glomerulus or Bowman's capsule, which is further uh, 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 tubule connected to a collecting duct. Okay, so this is structure known as glomerulus. Okay, so the glomerulus filters the small solutes that are present in the blood. Okay, further, this particular tubule is regarded as PCT. So PCT stands for proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so it helps in the reabsorption of ions, waters, and nutrients, and it further removes the toxins and adjusts the pH of the filter. Okay, so it is helping in the reabsorption of these ions and water. This particular segment is known as loop of Henle. Okay, this particular segment. And as it is going down, so it is known as ascending loop of Henle, and this particular segment is going up, so it is known as descending loop of Henle. So this ascending loop of Henle reabsorbs the nitrates or chlorides from the filtrate into the intestinal fluid, whereas the descending loop of Henle helps allow the water to pass from the filtrate into the intestinal fluid. Then moving further towards this particular segment, this is known as DT or DCT, distal convoluted tubules, DCT. Okay, so these tubules selectively secretes and absorbs different ions to maintain blood pH and electrolyte balance. Okay, then further there is a collecting duct. So collecting ducts reabsorbs solutes and waters from the filtrate, and then further these collecting ducts are connected to that pair of ureters, and then the urine is filtered, collected into the urinary bladder. Then further it gets collected over there, and then with the time when the pressure exceeds, it is passed through urethra. Right. So this is it about excretion in humans. Further, one more thing about this, that there are thousands or more than thousands of nephrons present in a single kidney, which helps in the excretion of these toxins. Okay, moving further towards the excretion in plants. So that was it about excretion in humans. Then another topic is excretion in plants. So how do plants excrete their byproducts or toxins or waste materials? So one of the things that can be regarded as waste material for plants is oxygen. Okay, so they do release that particular thing through gaseous exchange that we previously discussed. Right, so as we discussed already, that the gaseous exchange is taking place at the surface of stomata, and uh, it is guided by the stomatal opening and closing. So one of the mechanisms of excretion in plants is this. Another than Another mechanism can be water, which is getting diffused out through the process of transpiration, whereas there is one more mechanism which we regard as falling off of leaves. So the dead cells or the waste products which are there in the plants. So these get collected in leaves, vacuoles, leaves mainly. Okay, so these leaves, when they have a sufficient amount of waste materials or toxic materials, they do get fall off, which helps in the excretion of plants. So, and other than that, there are a few organisms like unicellular organisms. So, how do they excrete their byproducts or waste products? They do excrete to their surface, like how they ingest food, they do excrete in the same manner, right? So, this is it about life processes. So, we have discussed about modes of nutrition, which is a major process to regulate life. And other than that, we have discussed about respiration, then transportation of these uh, nutrients to the whole of the body, then furthermore, excretion. So these all are the processes which help in the uh, which usually help in the regulation and maintenance of all the cells that helps in the building up of our organism. And these all processes are responsible when should be functional in a person who is alive. If one or two of these processes get disturbed or uh, slow down or stop, then it would further be regarded as a major dysfunction or can lead to another uh, process to not regulate properly, or it won't let other regulate properly because all of these processes are interconnected. So that is it about chapter 5. Here we end